Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show that talks about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. I'm Kirsty, the host of the show, and I hope you'll join me as I chat to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. In this podcast, we look at topics such as near-death experiences, after-death communication, deathbed moments, and all kinds of spiritually transformative experiences. I also love to hear your first-hand accounts, so feel free to reach out via www.letstalkneardeath.com. Kia ora, hello. We are back at the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. We are at the very beginning of season 13. We've had a little break in between seasons there. And I have to say, I am very excited to be back here talking about these topics and bringing you a bunch of interviews that I've been recording, some work I've been doing behind the scenes between these two seasons. And I'm very, very excited about what we have in store. So for those of you who don't know, perhaps you're tuning in for the first time, I'm Kirsty Salisbury. I am the host of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. And I'm on a quest to talk about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. So this covers all sorts of topics, whether it be near-death experiences, the spiritual side of death, out-of-body experiences, spiritual things that happen in life. We talk about death and dying, and we're going to be talking about that a whole lot more in this upcoming season. So I'm very much guided by what I feel led to talk about. I don't really follow any structure, which is a good thing, and it's a little bit interesting as well. But this season, I felt very clear that I'm to look further at deathbed moments. So the moments of death, what happens for the individual, what happens for the loved ones around that individual. And I'm not talking near-death experiences here. I'm talking death experiences where the person stays dead. They don't necessarily come back and share with us what they saw, what happened. It's what might be occurring for the person who is in that transition moment. We've got all sorts of people that we're going to hear from in this season. And they include researchers and experts in this field. We've got hospice workers, people that dedicate a lot of time to being with people right in these final moments. We're going to be hearing from personal experiences, and also in particular today, we're going to be hearing some accounts from some of our listeners who tune into the podcast. So I'm really excited to get into this. I put out a post a little while ago via the email newsletter, via Facebook. So if you're not signed up for the newsletter, jump down below. There is a link in there to get signed up for the newsletter, to get all the updates about the episodes coming out, any VIP content, any special episodes. All you have to do is click the link and you'll be subscribed through to my newsletter. So I put the post out. Oh, you can join the Facebook group too. That would be nice. The Facebook page, sorry. Just go to Facebook, Let's Talk Near Death. I put the post out. Have you had a deathbed experience? Again, it's around where people stay dead. Have you been with a loved one at the moments of death? And did you have a spiritual experience? What happened? I put out a post. I was inundated with replies. So people were personal messaging me. They were emailing me. Some replied to the comments within the Facebook page. Some people really didn't want their names known, and we're going to hear from quite a few of these people today, the ones that replied to me with their experiences. But what I loved was the honesty in this. I loved that some people replied saying, I've been with X amount of people right in their final moments as they transition from this world. You'd think I would have seen something with so many people, and actually nothing happened. And I love that people replied with this, because what I think that does, it actually balances out the conversation. Because if I come and sit here and share my thoughts and tell you about all of these amazing experiences, it's a one-way conversation. It doesn't bring balance, and it makes the people who perhaps didn't have an experience feel like maybe they missed something. And over the years, I have talked to quite a few people who feel like maybe it was them. There was a reason why they didn't experience someone. Maybe we talked about after-death communication in previous seasons. I believe it was season 11 that we talked about that. That was amazing. That was another one where I felt very led to go down that pathway, talking about loved ones who come and communicate with us after they've died. And very interesting content there. But over the years, I've talked with people who feel like maybe there was a reason that they've done something wrong, or something wasn't aligned in their life, that they couldn't get the communication from their past loved ones. And it's the same with right at the end. Maybe there's a reason, or maybe there's something that they've blocked where they didn't have a spiritual experience, even though they were sitting with the person in the room as they passed. So I love the people that wrote in and said, actually, I haven't had one. I feel like it brings balance. I appreciate that. And so if you're listening and you're thinking, well, I had this experience, but actually nothing really significant happened, that is okay. It is nothing that, well, I don't believe there's any reason why it wouldn't have happened. And I'm happy to share both sides of the story. So today we're going to hear from some of the people who have had interesting experiences with loved ones as they've died. We're going to hear from different people throughout the season, and we're going to be picking up on some of the themes that take place right at the end of life. Some of you may know that I recently studied as an end-of-life doula, and so this is being with people right in these final moments, perhaps not at the point of death, but it's helping them to come to terms with the impending transition that's going to take place, with understanding that life will be finishing soon for them. It may be about helping the family more than the individual, getting all their fears in place, understanding what this process looks like. So I've been doing the study for that, qualified as that, and we're going to be hearing from the lady who set up the organization that trained me. And so she's going to be in one of the episodes. That's Helen. Love chatting with Helen. She's amazing. We could talk for so long. There's going to be some great insight there. Some of the themes would indicate that it's up to about 90% of people do experience something. And when I say experience something, it may not be a bright white light in the room. It may not be something very obvious. It may just be something subtle. There are a lot of physical things that happen towards the end of life. So physically, the breathing might change. There might be some noises that go with the breathing. The breathing might extend out. I wrote a blog post about this, actually. I'll put a link to the blog post in it because it was really interesting to go and look at what signs might happen, down to the point of conversation. So people might start talking about they're going on a trip. They're looking for their shoes. They're looking for their train tickets. They can't find their suitcase or their bag or something like that. These amazing themes that have been coming out of what I've been looking into in terms of what happens at the end of life. Now, I'm going to share some personal experiences, and we're going to hear a little bit about what some people have experienced. The themes we will get into in more detail throughout the other episodes that are coming up in this season. I want to talk with the experts, the people who really know what they're talking about in this field, talk about some of those themes. But it would seem that about 90% of people will experience something in these late moments in life, which I find fascinating. So a little bit like the after-death communication, it's not as uncommon as we think. It's more common than we think, but perhaps people aren't talking about it. It's a little bit personal. And even with a lot of the accounts that people came through to me with, they were sharing their personal stories. Quite a few people said, actually, I don't want my name mentioned. I don't want to be on video. I don't want to share who I am because this is so personal. It's so special to me. And I'm happy to respect that. I'm grateful to everybody who did share their experiences with me. And there have been so many. I can't fit them all into one episode today. So I apologize if you really were quite keen to have that and it's not in here. But I do greatly appreciate that. So when we look at this, I think there's probably some themes. I'm going to call it deathbed phenomena which is what happens for about 90% of people. Many people start talking about past loved ones. They can see past loved ones in the room, or they start talking about their names. Some people were writing to me saying that they were talking to people and talking about horses coming through the room, or they were in Victorian dress, or they had their top hat on, they were in black suits. There was all sorts of references to past times, I suppose, where culturally we did wear different clothes, we had different outfits, we did things quite differently. People would see these things in their room. So a lot of people talk about past loved ones being with them. I'm going to share a little story from Suzanne. So Suzanne in Italy wrote in and she shared this experience with us. Sadly, I lost my mum in November last year. She had been ill for some time and had wanted to die as she was fed up with her health issues. She had had enough. She waited until September when finally, after 19 months of me not visiting her in London, thanks to COVID, I managed to get there. She had had a bad fall and returned home a week after being in hospital. She went in for her afternoon sleep in her bedroom, and after a while I could hear her mumbling and found her apparently talking to her mother, saying, "Mummy, mummy." I don't think she was dreaming, and I believe that my mother appeared to call her home. My mother-in-law also appeared to be talking with her mother right before she died some years earlier as well. Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate that. Now, Gabby shares, a few hours before my aunt passed away, she went into a coma and she never came back. However, about 5 hours beforehand, she was sleeping and she was quite medicated. She started talking with her eyes closed, then her face fixed at one spot. She started talking. She said, "Oh, hi, I'm sorry. I don't remember your name. What is your name again?" And then she went on to say, "Oh, of course, that's right. I remember you. I just couldn't remember your name." It was really beautiful when she passed, and she had a big smile on her face as well. Ben shares, my mother was very ill in hospital in a side room, and she wasn't expected to make it through the night. But she was having a full-on chat with my deceased nan. She then turned to my stepbrother and said, "Well, say hello, your dad's over there." And she pointed to the corner of the room. However, being of a strong breed of person, when she recovered, she lived another 5 years, but she had absolutely no recollection of talking to my nan or seeing my stepdad. You may just think that she's hallucinating with all the drugs and everything, but I have no doubt in my mind that it was real. I have seen and experienced so many strange and wonderful things in my life that I'm certain there is life after death. And I mean certain, not just hopeful. Thank you, Ben. That's wonderful. Like I say, there were a few other people who wrote to me talking about people talking in the room, how they appeared to be seeing people, seeing past loved ones, being able to call out their name, to say, "Uncle Bob's there," or "There's Joe." Very personal. It seemed that quite a lot of people see past loved ones right before they go. Not quite sure whether it's their welcoming committee, whether we get to choose who would see us. I immediately think of young children, who they would see, because if they haven't had many people who have already died in their life, who steps in to be the welcoming committee? So it seems that we do have people who come in spiritually, who are able to help us cross over, transition from this world into the next. People that we know, recognize, love, trust. And it's made me really question, after hearing these personal accounts, who will be there for us? Do we get to choose? Do we have any say in who might be there when we die? Now, here's a little story from Susan about exactly this.
My mother passed away and at home, and I was there. Shortly before she passed, she was looking at somebody that was standing at the foot of the bed, but there was nobody there. and she was telling that person to go away. She was called out the person's first name several times, and it was not a name of a family member. So I'm thinking, and she's waving her arms. She's like, go away. I'm not going anywhere with you. Go away. And waving the person off. Go away. And I'm like, wow. And then apparently the person went away because she calmed down and no longer could get, upset about that. So a few minutes later, she looked over to the left of her bed, over near her bedroom closet, and she got such a beautiful smile. There was such love in her face, and her eyes lit up, and she started to say the name of her sister who had passed away. Her sister who she'd talked to every day on the phone at least once. And then shortly after that, she passed. So I think someone came to get her, and she did not want to go with whoever that was. So they sent her sister to come and take her then.
Wow. Oh, thank you, Susan. I wonder how much choice we have as to who we go with. And I wonder, depending who we go with, what that opens up. Have you thought about that at all?
I have thought about that. When my father passed, he passed in the hospital, and I wasn't there on that particular day. But I was there on a day close to when he passed, and he was kind of moving his thumb around his fingers, kind of a bit, and he was saying, at one point he asked my brother to hold the string for him. And of course, there's nothing there, but I think it is the silver cord, that part of you that connects you to your physical body. If you're in an out-of-the-body experience, they say there's a silver cord, which I saw when I was in an out-of-the-body experience at one point. But he was kind of playing with it. He told my brother to hold it. Hold on to that for me for a moment. And so my brother did. And then he at some point he let go of the string and he went home.
Thank you, Susan. Another theme that came out for me as I read through these replies was, can we choose when we go? We hear of people who hang on, they wait until the family arrive, or people that seem to know the exact moment in time when they're going to go. They just have a feeling that it's going to happen, and then sometimes that does happen exactly as they thought. We've heard of people who actually talk about their upcoming death as if it's just a normal thing. And we saw a little bit of this when we talked about after-death communication. The story that really stands out for me was Steffi. And Steffi's husband was killed in a truck accident, a crash. And he had said to her, some of his last words as they parted in the morning to go off to work was, "I'll call you after my crash." It was said jokingly. It wasn't taken seriously. I think she had a bit of a reply back to him like, "Don't you ever say that," or "Do not crash," or something like that. But it was said in jest. And then just a few hours later, he died in a crash. The interesting part about this conversation was that her phone rang after the crash. He said, "I'll call you after the crash." The phone rang. She couldn't actually answer it. There was no display on the screen. It was the strangest thing. And so you can't help but wonder, in hindsight, do some people know when they're going to die? Do some people talk about it before they go? Are we able to hold off? Do we choose when it happens? Because one of the themes that was coming out was that people seem to have an ability to either wait to die or to die before a certain thing happens. So they want to wait for everybody to arrive, or they wait until everybody goes out of the room and then they pass. So here's a story from Catherine. The first was a dear family friend. one who I'd always regarded as my surrogate grandmother, although when I was older, I realized that she was actually a similar age to my parents. I had heard that she was near death in her rest home, and I went to visit her. My mother was with her when I arrived, and I told her I was coming. I took her hand, greeted her, and listened to her labored breathing. This was my first experience of being at a deathbed, and intuitively, after about 10 minutes, I leaned in and whispered to her that it was safe to go. And she did. It could have, of course, been a coincidence, but it felt profound. I felt like it was permission giving, and I was honored to be there. The second story from Catherine is around her mother's death, which had occurred one night during a conference in which she was a key organizer. Catherine says, I'd sat through the night at the hospital in one of those lazy boy chairs that want to fold up the moment that you try to lie down. I had chatted to her and was holding her hand whilst trying to get comfortable. I remembered the previous experience, and I asked my mother if she felt safe to go. I reassured her that I was here and that she had done all she needed to. We passed the night wakefully and noisily. Very early the next day, I remembered a detail required for my morning conference session, and I released her hand to retrieve my phone charger and make a call. As I rummaged about in my bag, I suddenly became aware that the room was silent. She had passed the moment I let go. I've contemplated this often. In some ways, it feels the opposite of the previous occasion, that she would leave once I did. Perhaps some people prefer to be alone, knowing that they're loved and supported, but some prefer some sort of privacy for their final leaving. I can't help but wonder if I could have saved her a few labored hours of breathing if I hadn't held her hand so close. On the other hand, I find this experience very comforting for those close deaths where I haven't been present. I'm also left wondering what my preference would be. And I love this. I love how Catherine finishes her story saying what would her preference be, because I think some of us are really extrovert. We potentially would want lots of people around. Some of us are maybe a bit more quiet, introverted. Maybe we want peace. Maybe we want to be alone. But I've heard story after story of it's like the person is waiting for their perfect time. And that's why when we're with people at the end of life, it's important to give them space, to let go of their hand at times, even though that might be tough for us. It's important to let them have the ability to do what they want to do. Here's another story from David. My wife was a nurse before we met and married. When my sister was in palliative care and nearing the time of her passing and departure, my wife, my other sister, and I were by her bedside. My wife could tell, largely due to her nursing experiences, that the time was near, and she coyly suggested to me that I go out for a cigarette, which I did. By the time I came back in from my cigarette, my sister had departed. Sometime later, my wife confided in me that she'd seen a white light come out of one of my sister's eyes, and that was undoubtedly her departure. Beautiful. Every experience is so personal, isn't it? So personal. So it would seem that from the responses and from the conversations I've had, there may be a small theme of people holding on, not releasing into their transition because they're not convinced that everything's okay. Catherine talked about this in her experiences, talking about giving permission. And I think it's very important to sit with people and give them permission to go. Let them know that we love them. Let them know that it's okay. And I think sometimes they're just worried that actually everything isn't okay. A story from Jeff was that he promised to take care of Gloria. Here's Jeff's story. Jeff was with his grandmother, Frances, at her bedside, and she seemed to be holding on. Jeff says he knelt down beside her, said, "Hi, Grandma Frances, this is Jeffrey. Can you hear me?" There was no response. I continued to pat her hand. "Grandma, everyone is here with you. Laurie, Brittany, Pam, Mike, Bobby, Gloria, and me. We're all so proud of you and your show of strength. I think I know what you're waiting around for. I think you need to hear something before you go be with our Father in heaven. It's okay to let go and be with God, as He is waiting and He has a special place for you. We will be there soon to join you and see you again. I waited a second or two in order to regain my composure. And then I said, I promise you that I'll watch over Gloria and protect her. May God bless you all, and we love you. It's okay to relax. Now please let go. Let God. It's okay. I promise. We all love you. We're very proud of you. And I kissed the top of her head one last time. I leaned up, and Gloria and the others came in close, and they said, it's time. All gathered around, and someone asked, how did I know? I didn't answer. I was not in charge, but I do know that her breathing slowed down even more as we spoke. We all grabbed Francis's hands and each other's hands as well, and once in a hedge of protection, we circled around Grandma. Francis immediately leaned back, up with her head and her chin now raised high and tilted back off her chest. She looked relieved and carefree. The muscles in her face were now peaceful. Francis held her head straight back on her pillow like she was at attention. Just seconds before, she had been slumped over sideways, looking depressed. But with her back straight, she looked proud and almost with a smile. She had a look of contentment on her face, and she took in a long, powerful breath. She put her chest out proud as she graduated life. She accepted the biggest promise ever. The family embraced one another with tears of sadness and joy. It was a bittersweet moment knowing that Frances was gone, but she was no longer suffering. Gloria later asked me what I said to Frances. I told her it was what she was always waiting for. She was waiting to hear. And Gloria asked, well, what was that? I promised her that I would take care of you and that everything would be okay. Gloria beamed. Of course, that's what she was holding on for. Of course. We hugged and smiled and hugged again. Now, there's another kind of theme that comes through, and this is one where I'm going to share a personal story. One where the person who is dying has a lucid moment, has a moment of clarity where they're awake, their sentences make sense. It's as if everything is okay. They're quite common right in those late stages, and I believe it's something like if this happens, then they'll guess that around about 24, 48 hours later, the person will be gone. So moments where beforehand they may be sleeping a lot, they may be unable to respond, they're not really aware of what's happening, probably, sleeping most of the time or in a state of not being able to understand how things are. And then just with a flick of a switch, something happens and they become alert. They might sit up, they might have a full conversation with total clarity, making total sense. And then they go back to how they were previously, quite likely sleeping. So I share my little personal story of this, which was with my own grandmother. It was about 15 years ago, and I was living in the UK. My husband was with me at the time, and because I'm British, a lot of my family lived over there. So I had my grandparents. I come from a very small family, so they're really only grandparents that were there. And my grandmother lived in the northeast of England. And she had become quite unwell. She was getting on in age, and they had called us to say things aren't looking good. You probably want to get here. So my father, who was living in New Zealand at the time, he flew over. We were close to London, just outside of London. We picked him up and we drove up to the northeast to go and visit my grandmother. We got to the hospital, and she had been not unresponsive, but very, very lacking in energy. She'd been sleeping a lot. She wasn't making much sense because she really was quite at the end stages of life. We got to the hospital, we got there, and we sat with her for a while. She was non-responsive, just there, sleeping, breathing, slowly breathing. And then suddenly she opened her eyes and she saw us. And I saw my grandmother a little bit at the time. It wasn't like she hadn't seen us for years because we were in the same country. We would go up and see her, but she hadn't seen my father, which is her son, for quite some time. So she opened her eyes And she was like, wow, this is amazing. And she was chatting away. She knew exactly who we were. Even though he'd just flown in from the other side of the world, she understood that he was there. She understood she was in hospital. She understood what was going on. And we had the most amazing, beautiful conversation with her. She was good probably for about half an hour. She was able to have a full conversation. She was very lucid, very able to do things. And I can remember she was saying, gosh, I'm hungry. I could really murder a roast dinner. And that was her way of saying she really wanted one. She loved her roast dinners with all the trimmings and the sauces and the Yorkshire puddings, and can't blame her, really. It's quite yummy. So we said, can we get a meal for her? And the doctors and the nurses said, no, she can't eat. We were saying, but she's hungry. She wants to eat. And they pushed back on us. And it was heartbreaking because we just wanted to give her one of her last requests. But also we had the thought that if she ate something, it would give her energy, which would help her to heal, which would get her back on her feet. And we saw that if she could just eat something, that would actually be something very significant and might help her to get better. What we didn't understand was that all of her organs had pretty much shut down, or they weren't functioning correctly. They weren't able to process the food. We didn't realize that what was happening was that she was having a lucid moment. So very heartbreaking to plead with the doctors and the nurses, can we please just get her some food? And they're saying we can't give her any food. And then after a little while, she got tired again. So we had probably about 30 or 45 minutes with her, which was quite a long time. We spent some of that trying to fight with them to get the meal. And then she went back to sleep, and it was less than, I think it was about 12 hours later that she actually died. It was less than 24 hours that she had died. And it was so hard to see her go from being this vibrant person who knew who we were, who understood what was happening, to gone. It seemed so quick. And yet these lucid moments are very, very common. And so the doctors and the nurses understood that that's what was happening, and that if she had had a meal, it wouldn't have helped her in any way. It may have made things worse. Lucid moments, people often wake up and they will share something really important, their final thoughts, their final moments. It's such a gift. And it can seem like in these moments that the person actually isn't going to die, that there's nothing wrong with them, they're okay, that it's like they override everything that's going on for them physically in their body. But it's a clear sign that there's only limited hours left. So another beautiful theme that we'll probably talk about later in the season. Now, people talk about changes within the room, how the room may fill with light, or the temperature changes, or there's an energy change, something goes on in the room. People talk about windows, talking about seeing a breeze. There's been a few people reply to me, actually, send me messages about how they felt like the person went out through the window. So I've got an interesting one here from Juniper. She says, when my best friend's father passed, I was in the kitchen while she sat with her dad. He hadn't spoken for days, and he didn't really appear to be there still, if that makes sense. The seconds before he passed, he opened his eyes and he said very loudly, so that I could hear it in the kitchen, "Open the window, open the window, open the window." And then he took his last breath and he passed. And then the old timer on the oven in the kitchen went off. Just amazing. People talk about how they can feel other people in the room. And again, if you haven't had this, that's okay. When we say about 90% of people have these experiences, it's right across the board, physical experiences. There might be dream things that happen, dream states, the lucid moments. But quite often people feel like the physical room changes. So the energy in the room changes, light changes, you can feel the spirit go out. And I find it interesting. There's something about windows. I don't understand that, but I don't know. I guess that's in our physical body. We feel like we need to go up and out through a window. Who knows? Here's an example of an outside experience that took place with Sharon.
My mom had a hemorrhagic stroke and then 3 brain bleeds after that. So like the day and a half before she died, she was out of it completely. But there were some things that happened that day that it's her. I mean, it was her. There was no other way it could have been anybody but her. So what she did was, she died at like 3:30 in the morning. And about midnight, I went outside and I stood on the porch to, and I looked up at the sky and all the clouds and everything, the stars all looked normal. And my daughter came out and she stood out there with me. And we stood out there for a minute. And then all of a sudden, the stars got huge, really huge and really bright. Not normal, at least not for around here. Not normal. And I looked up and I said, oh my God, they just turned all the lights in heaven on so Mom could find her way. And it was definitely a paranormal thing, a blessing thing, but it was not a normal sky that night. And so then we went back in and she passed, but she passed so peacefully. And I knew that hearing was the last thing to go. So I got down at her ear and I just kept telling her, I love you. 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 And I knew that she took those words with her when she left, because the moment she left, the room was empty.
So as you can tell, there's quite a lot coming up in the upcoming episodes of season 13, where we're talking about deathbed experiences, deathbed moments. I hope you'll join us. Don't forget to join the newsletter, to subscribe to the Facebook page, to let me know if you've had experiences like this, because I may still add some in a little bit further down the track. It depends on timing. I love this conversation. I think it's really beautiful. It's a little bit hard, and I understand that this is a really hard topic for some people, but I think it's a very important conversation, a very beautiful one. And I am excited to share the upcoming episodes that I have with you with more and more personal experiences. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to seeing you in our next episode with our first guest. Much love.